Can you believe it? We've made it to session number 3 already, Jesse. Good morning, buddy.
Hey man, what's going on? No, I cannot believe it. And judging with the morning you have, I feel like that image over your shoulder is trying to be a little piece of self-actualization there.
I'm just it's I'm sending vibes is what I'm doing. I want everybody to experience the Zen.
Yeah, funny.
Well, welcome everybody. Looks like some folks are coming in now. So we'll just give it just a second here. The chat is open. Make sure you change it to everyone. And where are you joining us from? I'd love to hear. I am in Denver at the moment, post PAX 8. I had some meetings here, and so I stayed an extra day. And so I'm at a small hotel somewhere in the Cherry Creek area and hanging out to do this webinar with Jesse. Wherever the world happens to find me, I will jump on this session with Jesse.
um, how was Snoop Dogg? That's my question.
I will reserve comment for when I'm not recorded and permanently on the internet. But I think people liked it. Let's just say that.
All right, I'll take that.
Welcome, John, in Dallas. That's awesome. It's probably getting warm in Dallas now. We were just there a few weeks ago, and it was already
35 plus.
Yeah.
You like that? I use Celsius right there for you, Luis.
Did you do that math in your head?
I did.
Is the mathing? Okay. It would have been 40 plus already, probably.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay. Geez, that is hot.
All right. Well, let's get going. I know some people will drop in as we go. Reminder, this session is recorded. We have a link on the ScalePad website where we're posting all the sessions. They are also on our YouTube channel. And then we'll have a link for you at the end that you'll be able to go retrieve. Or sorry, in the follow-up email where you can retrieve the templates and everything that we're going to talk about today. Because there's a couple of really snazzy ones that I think you'll want to have as you think about this process. So Jesse Miller, founder of PowerGrid, is on the line. PowerGrid is a VC ecosystem that helps MSPs obviously move their compliance programs forward. Jesse, welcome. I'm Luis, and we have a product at ScalePad called Control Map that does the GRC stuff and support for over 60 plus frameworks. Yeah. And helps you drive all that process that you're going to learn really well with Jesse and PowerGrid to deploy at scale with all your customers in a super awesome GRC tool.
A beautiful friendship, as they say.
Indeed, indeed. So last session, we're kind of approaching this entire series by tackling the various phases that Jesse looks at in his program to sequentially and pragmatically help MSPs launch their vCISO programs. And so in session 2, we had these 3 themes around developing your hypothesis, introducing you to compliance frameworks, and choosing that foundational framework that at least will be part of how you go to market with the majority of your clients. And these were some of the highlights of that session. I have a link to it here. And so here's where we post all the stuff from the previous sessions. And this session will also be posted there after a day or so, once we get all the recordings and everything up together and uploaded.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in here too on that, Luis. I think what we're trying to do here with this series is obviously we can't get through the whole PowerGrid vCISO system in 6 webinars. But the idea is we're trying to get as much value to get you started and give you actionable stuff. So this isn't just, us navel gazing for 60 minutes, right? We're trying to actually give you some things you can go action. I think you'll see that today.
Navel gazing, hey? Is that something you do on the farm a lot?
I believe that comes from Rome. It's a term that came from like the Roman times, but I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me there.
Okay, well, so anyways, grab that link. Let me actually drop it in the chat as well. If somebody doesn't mind grabbing it, because I'm kind of multitasking here as it is. I got it, actually. It was quick. vCISO resources. There you go. So today we're really talking about this idea of capability mapping, rules of engagement. And this is one of my favorite things about today's session is Jesse has such a broad view of the different types of experiences that MSPs go through as they're getting these VCSO programs up and off the ground. And so I think there's a lot of really good best practices. This is kind of the hallway track, just now that we've just been at a conference, is the kind of stuff that nobody tells you in a book, right? And then you kind of figure out by trying, but it's nice to have a bit of that orientation and a bit of that precaution going into it. And then we're going to walk through one of Jesse's sample risk assessment processes, which I think are super powerful to understand, because risk assessment is probably one of the most core things you can do as you kick off your VCSO program. So it's awesome to have a good sense of what a good one would look like. And this is a template Jesse has so generously shared for this process or for this webinar that has been tried, tested, and true over years of helping MSPs through this process. So
Yeah.
that'll be awesome. So this was the overall roadmap of the session. Today we're in that implement session, and we have 3 more webinars still to do after this one. And so we're going to be tackling those additional parts of the roadmap as well. Sorry, develop is what we're doing today. Implement is the next one. We're already working on the next one.
There's a lot, like I said.
Indeed, yeah. So one of the things we've been doing is asking some maybe demographic questions, because I think it is good to understand a bit of where people are on the spectrum of even the security mindset and all that stuff. So I'm going to kick off this poll here, and would love your participation so we can understand a bit of how you're feeling about this question. And the question is, who owns a security strategy for your clients? At small shops, this is sometimes the owner operator. At larger shop, it kind of moves around between different people. In the sort of medium growth places, there's maybe it's a shared responsibility. This is a super interesting thing to get a sense of who owns this. What have you seen out there, Jesse? I'm sure it's all over the map.
Yeah, so I would say in programs that I come into, or people that join the Power Grid, right? It's like say, hey, we want to build this out. I'm typically seeing it, and I'm interested to see the feedback. I don't want to influence results, right? But I typically see like it's a VCIO or AM who's kind of doing it. Yeah, so that's I would say that's pretty standard, and that's what I expected. So I am a little bit surprised to see no one owning it clearly today at 36%. So I'm glad you guys are all here. We're going to try and help that grow a little bit. So
yeah,
but that's not too surprising for me, those results.
Well, this is kind of what got us thinking, because we do have these conversations casually with folks, and it's maybe a question people don't expect to get, because it's the kind of thing you start doing kind of organically, but nobody clearly owns it. Nobody ever had it in their job description. And this is where a bit of this capability mapping came from, and sort of the need to really understand who's doing which pieces of all these things. Right. The other thing is, I think, as you'll find as we get into the capability map, is that the number of things that people realize, once they start, that need to be covered from a capability perspective is a lot more than they originally envisioned or imagined.
Yeah.
And so it's a good idea to, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this capabilities map is great, right? Because we're almost doing a mini risk assessment on our personnel of like, how risky is it for us to deliver this service? Where do we have gaps? What do we need to fix, or what do we need to get ready for? And the other thing is then looking at this, like you said, Luis, you're going to see there's a lot more to it. Like I'll see, our VCIOs can handle that, is sometimes what I hear. And it really needs to be separated out, because there's so much to be done there that a VCIO can handle it, but they're going to go down a security rabbit hole, and they're going to neglect their other technical duties with the client. So, all that to say is that you can use this capabilities map that you're going to get to start building out a job description for filling these roles, or creating a plan and making someone accountable in your organization to own this and start moving towards that ideal.
And on the job description front, if you're joining us for the first time on this session, on the resources link that I shared, we had actually put up a sample job description that you might consider for this in one of the previous sessions materials. So check that out. I'm going to bring up the capability map now, just here in Word, and we will be sharing this file with everybody so that you can, maybe even adjust it to your specific needs. But the idea is that you'll review the capabilities in one of the various areas that we have here, and simply ask yourself the question, who can confidently handle this today? Or is there a skills gap here potentially we need to fill? And or somebody who wants to take it on and would love to be upskilled to tackle that, of course. So you can, each table is on its own page. You can grab each page individually. If you have a larger team and you want to sort of split up some of the assessment process, that works well. And I want to briefly just talk about this slide that we had in one of the previous sessions, which is, where do VCs come from? Jesse, we at the time we kind of chatted that VCs in many cases come from unexpected places.
Yeah.
And a lot of MSPs don't often stop to think to go search in some of these less common places for their next VCs will hire potentially.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, right prior to our webinar today, I was talking with a candidate for one of our Power Grid members as part of the process I'm taking them through. So I was helping them vet a VC, so potentially. And this candidate was coming from a sales engineering background. And we'll see this, as you'd expect, they were very comfortable with presentation, helping work kind of the sales funnel and supporting that technical role, talking with executive teams and making business cases, and they understood that side of it really well. But then when it came to, hey, do we understand compliance frameworks and how to really get down into risk management, things like that, it's, well, theoretically I understand it, but I'm going to need a little support there. And so at the end of the day, we're like, hey, yeah, this person seems like a good candidate. But then when we map them up against this capabilities matrix, we need to understand where those gaps are and where we can give them support and help them grow. So I think it's important to take this as a whole and create like almost a scorecard out of this, right?
Yeah. So the first category is the program leadership and strategy. And there may be other capabilities here that you identify or that you want to be more granular about as you kind of run through the process, because you may have an owner operator that wants to be involved in some of the components of it, or they're thinking a little bit more broadly about some of the strategy that you do alongside VCIOs or alongside the overall QBR motion that you have in your business and so on. So I think these things will all kind of start to mix into each other to some extent with other roles. But let's talk through some of these. The security objectives, is this a misunderstood thing in many cases until people start to get some clarity around what they want from the program?
Yeah, indeed. It's what are the goals of the business at the end of the day? It says down there, align cybersecurity to business goals, but the clients don't care about security. Sorry to say. They care about the outcomes that security gets them. So how are we digging in with the client to say, where are you taking the business? What are the plans for the next 3, 6, 12, 36 months? And what's our tech? This is a VCIO conversation now. Like, what is the technology needed to support those? And then the VCSO conversation or security conversation is, where do we see risk as we start to do this? And what are some potential landmines? What are things that could stop us, slow us down? How do we remove those roadblocks with the security program? So that conversation is something that needs to be had very precisely, because as you just mentioned, or as you just saw, I'm talking about it in removing roadblocks, not technical controls. And how do we make security a department of no, right? I always say security should not be the department of no, it should be the department of go. So that's a very precise and important bullet that we're talking about that sets the tone for the entire conversation with the client.
I used to joke that the Mac users at any organization used to be the pocket of resistance. Now it's the security guys. Also, it's not lost on me that some of these things have implied processes or programs that maybe have set up. For example, in the capability of running a security steering meetings, it's not lost on me that most of your clients may have no security committee. And so there's a bit of a maybe upfront process to go and talk to the client, be like, hey, I'd like to have 2-3 people in a security committee. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about. And this helps you create a bit of that accountability and ownership inside of the client, which may be non-existent, today. So it's important to consider what things you need to set up ahead of these capabilities as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Luis. And that leads into the strategic security roadmap, because that committee, whoever that is, and doesn't need to be something formal, it can be you working with the business owner and one of their right-hand people, right? To say, hey, we're all going to bring consensus on what we're going to do or not going to do. And we're going to say, we might accept this risk or we want to do this. But at the end of the day, we're building that roadmap to say, this is what a shared management framework that we're all going to operate from, our single source of truth.
Yeah, so Travis sent a note, and Travis, if you want to change your to everyone, then the chat will be global. But he sent a message saying, security shouldn't be the Department of No, it should be Department of Yes, as Jesse was saying, but here's how. So the whole yes and, I think, is a very powerful thing for security teams or leaders to be driving some kind of motion forward. And the language is so nuanced and important in these scenarios because it's easy to just with one no to crush people's dreams. So, or make them feel like security is just going to be in the way of getting anything done at the company, right? So, all right, so that's program leadership and strategy. And like I said, some implied things here. One of those implied programs could be helping a client stand up their own security committee, the governance of that, how they run it, and what some of the clear objectives are. Risk compliance and advisory. So let's talk through this one a little bit, Jesse. How have you seen this kind of get stood up inside of the MSP and then kind of transplanted over to the clients?
Yeah, this actually is a kind of a callback to what we talked about last time, and why I'm so adamant that as you get started, you really need to be niche down and focus on a specific type of client, especially if you don't have a ton of regulatory and compliance acumen. Because it's hard enough to learn one framework and how that manifests itself in a business, but you try 2, 3, 4, 5, all of a sudden you've created just a complete, you've basically created a complete stoppage of work. And I'm thinking like WIP and factory, right? Because it's very similar for how we do things as MSPs, but you've created a bottleneck in your system by doing that. So how do we create throughput? Is we focus down and we pick one. So all that to say is that there's a lot of expertise that's required to take a regulatory framework, apply it to a client, and then help them successfully execute on that, right? So number one is a risk or a gap assessment. Then you got to sit down with that security steering committee that hopefully you've created and say, okay, here's the things that are gaps. Here's how we see you can address them. Here's how you might be able to meet them without buying something, just by changing your business process, right? So we want to try and show them how the most cost-effective way to meet the regulatory compliance, right? And then, risk register could be part of that. So are we doing enterprise risk management? And I've actually seen this, Luis, be a way that you can create leadership in your client's organization. So if you go in somewhere to, a smaller company that maybe has a board or an executive team, and they're not maintaining a corporate risk register, you can be like, hey, for this compliance framework, we need to do a risk register. Let's use this as a springboard and start building in business risks and then tying in the cyber risks and how they relate to that. All of a sudden, you've become a leader in the business for talking about risk and helping structure direction to help the business move forward. And it's a completely different conversation at that point.
I love this one so much because the alternative to this would be sending the client a denial of service letter for the thing that you pitched them that they said no to. It's like, oh, we'll sign off here because I want to wash my hands of it. As opposed to moving the risk over to a conversation inside the client and having a risk register that they have visibility into and that they can regularly review on their own time in their own cadence of meetings to say, these are some of the risks that we've chosen to accept. And to have them, take it on themselves to considerably review these on a regular basis and reassess if they want to maybe we're not comfortable with this particular risk anymore. But if you just have the client sign off on, oh, well, you said no to our, XDR service, they have zero visibility in the future into that stuff.
Yeah, that's why strategic risk, a strategic approach to risk is so important, because it really is transformational for the relationship. And by the way, you can help their business get better. That's exciting. Like, I want that. I want to see them win. That's exciting for me. And I got to be a part of that. And by the way, I got paid to do it as well. So, and all this to say, compliance was the lever for that. So let's just say an SEC regulated company in the US, where you have to show that you're maintaining a risk register and report your risks. And that's part of the cyber requirements. Well, you just did that, but you did so much more than just that.
Yeah, very powerful. Um, the regulatory triggers, I think that's always going to be framework specific. Of
Yeah.
course, some of those things are going to pop up depending on the client industry. I don't know, Jesse, do you find that most of the shops that you work with are very vertically focused or tend to be a little more generic or non-specific?
No, I mean, it's very rare that I get a vertically focused one, and that's always, they always have better success, right? So a lot of what I'm doing is sitting down and saying, okay, we work with these three verticals, and so okay, let's use the power. Long story short here, let's use the system to define what those are. And then going through that process, we're going to see, okay, one of those is probably the best fit. So I'm always pushing people towards niching down, at least for this service, to get started and trying to get them to narrow that focus. And once they do, they really start to see success. And it's kind of like that light bulb moment.
Yeah. I just had a thought also about the third one that I wanted to briefly go back to.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that we've talked about in previous sessions the idea of the compliance mindset or the risk mindset at all levels of your MSP,
Mm-hmm.
simply because, there are situations or things that create risk that some person over here may not see, but that the support team, clearly sees. And having a bit of the risk mindset or risk documentation mindset is super powerful. Even project teams, we talk about a lot how every time you do a project, you might be reducing one piece of risk over here, but introducing another set of risks over there. And so I think having in your project scoping of any kind of infrastructure project or software project or deploying a VM, there should be a part of your scope of work that includes risk documentation and understanding, what
Yeah.
potential things you're introducing, dependencies, et cetera, et cetera. And I
Yeah,
think that's a
absolutely.
powerful thing for everybody to have visibility on.
Yeah.
The client audits, this one's so deep because it can
Yeah.
be super, super superficial, or it could be quite deep. But so I think depends on how you're going to market with your vCISO program, at what level you want to do these
Yeah.
client audits,
Yeah.
or your participatory role if there is an auditor that's going to get involved. But
Yeah.
um,
I mean, this is so important. In looking at this, going through this, you might say, hey, maybe we want to wait a second on tackling regulatory clients or certain regulatory clients or offering them these services. And we want to actually just take a vCISO cybersecurity approach to non-regulated clients and get our feet underneath this if we have some, right? So it's important. It's really important, especially with the audit process or with all of these things. What I always encourage people is if you feel that you're deficient in these and you're like, this is a long runway to get skilled up in this, use a partner for that. There's plenty of good partners out there, right? You can say, okay, we're going to use you as our audit prep firm. And so they're going to work hand in glove with us. The vCISO program is aligning the cybersecurity strategy with
hmm,
compliance, but we have a compliance expert who's going to help you through the audit and be your auditor. And there's plenty of good firms out there for that, right?
for sure, that's awesome. This is exactly what I mean about, reading between the lines of these things, because there's a lot of stuff that is kind of impossible to document front to back on
Right.
these notes. But so policy and governance, and this is maybe the spot where people start to feel the weight of like a vCISO program or compliance overall,
Yeah.
is this idea of governance, because like so many of us at MSPs have been used to the very cyclical project mindset,
Mm-hmm.
start here and there, and it's kind of a bit of this dopamine hit. It's like, we got this one done, let's move on to the next one. And programs like governance can feel so heavy and continuous and indefinite and never ending that it
Yeah.
takes a certain kind of individual to certainly tackle this. But um, it's a never ending process for sure. Maintaining
Yeah.
policies. Obviously, a lot of these can be templated. They come templated in products like Control Map.
Yeah.
But over time, some of the client deviations need to be looked at on a regular basis. But obviously, as you bring more clients into your program, you want to have ease of deployment of policies and templates
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah, I think like I said, we know that's where Control Map's strong, is being able to kind of give you get a lot, the lion's share of that work done. But at the end of the day, then you have to have a program where you're doing at least annual review and reviewing the performance management of your controls. Because a big mistake I see made is that you come in and you drop a stack of policies on a client and you just you put more risk into the business because you immediately place them out of compliance with the policies that they now say they're adhering to, right? So this has to be a checks and balances thing going on with governance, right?
Yeah, I guess there's the potential that you need to go backwards a little bit before you can go forwards. You know, once you get this program started, you're going to reveal a lot of things that you thought were maybe okay, but so there's that reality to contend
Well,
with as well.
this makes the conversation very easy, by the way. A client says we need policies for X amount of compliance. Well, you can use the policy review as kind of a mini risk assessment. Okay, your policy says you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you're not doing these two things. We have an answer for that, but it requires you to do something, right? So either it's again a mini risk conversation. Either we take these lines out of the policy for now, or we implement the thing that makes those lines true. And so it's then again, the client, like you said, is making the decision either yes or no. I made the choice. I understand the consequences.
Let me ask you, Jesse, if you feel that even policy development on its own, because I feel like even in my early days, I was doing some light policy development. It was, acceptable use stuff, you bring your own device type of stuff. Have you seen this work really well as a gateway to sort of the larger conversation, obviously around compliance risk and ultimately doing a VCSO type of program?
Yeah, I think it definitely it's a buying trigger for people to say, hey, maybe I didn't care about security, but now I need these policies to meet demand. Cyber insurance is now requiring a tested incident response plan policy, at least for affordable policies to underwrite, right? So that's an easy one to get into. Okay, we'll come in, we'll write your incident response policy, and then we'll run a tabletop with you, and that's like it could be like an entry point, right? And then you get in there and that uncovers, okay, well, your policy, you're not able to do these things. Or likewise, if you have a compliance framework, you come in and say, okay, well, we can give you this policy, but we have to know whether you're doing that or not. So the way to do that is we run a risk assessment with the policy, and we see a lot of partners being successful there as well.
Now, this last one of ensuring the alignment with technical controls, tell me a little bit about how you see MSPs initially uncovering the need for the cross-departmental collaboration. Whoever's kind of actually taking on this policy control review process internally is going to have to work with people that have the access or can deal with the actual verification of technical pieces on the servers, on the individual desktops, on the EDR platform, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you see that the technical resources have to be involved. And I think we're going to talk about that later, but it really is a cross-functional exercise. So we talked about project management. And I think a good VCSO has to have a piece of good project manager in them to be able to do all these kinds of things, right? Yeah. So you're going to have to bring in other resources potentially to verify that. Now, there are some rainmakers or unicorns, whatever you want to call them, that can do all of this on their own, but those don't grow on trees, and we can't consistently reproduce that type of a employee in our organization. So you have to break that out.
Okay. Security stack oversight. This was maybe a deeper one too, just from a technical perspective, and really suggests how much of that collaboration needs to happen internally.
Yeah, that's really what we just talked about. And I swear I didn't plan that. It just happened to be the next one, but really the performance management. So you're going to have two pieces to this. So with any control, there's going to be residual risk. So you have to actually review the controls, and are they doing what they said they were doing? So the VCSO is going to have to rely on technical people to filter that information up to them, or at least show them how to give them what they need for that information. Then they're going to have to synthesize that. And then they're going to have to review that against the risk that's posed by either non-compliance or incompliance. Simple example, MDR, XDR performance, which we just talked about, which is in the list there. How many do all the endpoints have MDR on them? Like, you're probably not going to have 100% compliance across the environment. There might be one or two, but we have to review that and say, oh, these computers were just onboarded, new employees. It just hasn't shown up yet, or it's going to be rolled out in the next cycle. When it gets pushed, it happened to catch it when it, as they were getting rolled out. Or this is a server that was deployed that we didn't know about, that a team spun up, and that's kind of a big deal. We need to get that fixed. So there's that performance management piece that the VCSO should be governing as part of the governance program, although they may not be executing it, as you see here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the thing with projects and teams that deploy new resources and infrastructure, is that they're often quick to move on to the next project. And that handoff to the next team to ensure this performance is
Mhm.
often a missed opportunity for sure. The
Well,
documentation piece is
it,
missing.
yeah, it's an imperfect world. It's never going to be perfect. And we seek with all our processes and our checklist to make that happen. But at the end of the day, things are going to get missed. And we have to have a system of checks and balances through the VCSO program to clean those things up.
I love that terminology, even to be client facing, our own system of checks and balances. I think that
Mm-hmm.
increases a lot of the confidence in the MSP that these things are not
Yeah.
being sort of falling through the cracks and so
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. We're going to call the other teams out. We're going to hold them accountable at the end of the day, right? And
Yeah,
showing that we're doing that.
yeah, and I suppose that it's a bit political in the sense that you don't want to do that on purpose to the client
Yeah.
to demean your own teams internally. You want to use it as an exercise internally
Yeah.
to drive that accountability and performance. But it's the kind of governance and program that you set up internally that is going to seem very valuable to a client.
Well,
Um,
this is a good point because this is what you're going to run into in competitive situations is you're going to have VCSO firms who don't do MSP that are telling your prospects and are selling as a differentiator that they are this impartial party and an MSP can't do VCSO services because you have a conflict of interest. Now, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but I'll just quickly, the TLDR is that's a no true Scotsman fallacy, right? Number one, look that up if you don't know what it is. But what it's really about is lines of governance and ethics. And so when we're doing that and we're talking about how we create ethical service delivery through the VCSO and we're doing a system of checks and balances in our own organization and creating those corporate lines of governance, and we're going to translate that to the client, all of a sudden that's a very powerful narrative because not only are we having their best interest in mind, we have the easy button to get things done. What does that other consultant have to do? They have to talk to the MSP, talk to a person, bring a contractor in. What do I have to do to get a problem solved? I send a Teams message, right? So this is a way that you're going to run into that. So I want to prepare you to be able to answer that correctly.
so the inability to be judge, jury, and executioner is a fallacy, is what we're saying, obviously, and that the right controls in place, I think you can help dispel a bit of that sense that you can't be all things in
Yeah.
one. And of course, there's levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think for this basic governance cycle, I think it's very powerful to be able to have these checks and balances for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
the incident.
I just created a war probably in the comments, but that's all right.
No, nobody is fighting you in the comments yet. It's only a matter of time, I think. But so incident and response planning here, and I think as we talked about a bit of how you launched this program, you may not have a VCSO in your organization yet. You may have sort of a shared accountability around the security ownership. We saw 36% of the folks don't really have ownership inside of their teams around the security strategy for clients. And so this may be one of those things that takes a little bit of time to develop or get skill up some folks internally or hire for. And it's a very different thing to do than your average IT technical, even
Mm-hmm.
security technical work, because it's really thinking about business risk and spending a lot of time understanding the client's own concerns around
Yeah.
how are they going to recover from a certain situation and so on. But
Yeah.
let's talk through some of these, Jesse.
Yeah, this is a key piece that should be in that is what this is a key piece to really tie down value to what a VCSO brings to an organization that maybe the client doesn't already have. They're like, well, I have my VCIO, like, why do I need a VCSO or whatever the case may be? This one thing right here, this resilience planning and incident response planning is huge because as I mentioned, number one, insurance is starting to require it. I talking to brokers, they're telling me that companies that have tabletop tested incident response plans are orders of magnitude lower claims when they come in from a cyber instance because the blast radius is contained, the company's back up and running quickly, and they just take it as a small bump in the road. So underwriters are keying on that and saying, oh, I can give big discounts if you have this in place, right? And then there's the flip side of it. That's great. Save me some money. But what does it really mean for my business when I can be down? Like, let's say I get hit with some sort of attack and I'm back up and running after a day and a half instead of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's probably millions of dollars in a lot of companies, right? So now you're tying down key monetary value to the service that's providing. So this is something that really is important to get right and to have in your package.
I love this. Many of the verticals and or governance bodies of associations of specific verticals, whether it's law firms or architects or HIPAA, a lot of them are also just individually starting to require this of their member companies or other constituents. And this is often not known to the IT providers necessarily, unless they've been around that particular vertical for a while, because the clients don't often share this or even look into these things or are aware of these things at all on their own. In Canada, for example, the doctor community, they have these very specific guidelines. And we had a number of doctors, and it wasn't until the first one, after somebody had had an incident, that they kind of made a big stink about the guidelines, finally shared this internal document that the school had for them. And I'd never seen it before. It was kind of one of those eye-opening things like, well, let's go talk to our other doctor clients, and do they even know that this exists? And surprise, surprise, they weren't even aware of this document. And many times they expect them to comply without having to prove it. But obviously, it's not until the proverbial poo-poo hits the fan that they become a problem for them. So
yeah, an incident response plan that's just generated in shelfware is really, it's not doing much except checking a box, and that's proven right by what the insurers are seeing. So the last thing is then the lessons learned. When you go through these, you're going to come away with some things that need to be fixed. And by the way, incident response planning, not even the tabletop side of things. What we have MSPs do is we create a cadence for this where it's part of onboarding, and there's a workshop we run with the leadership team. And so we have a way to do that where basically you bring the leadership team together, you get them to say, this is your role in the incident response plan. Are you okay with that? Right. Number one. So everyone's kind of like forced to not just like wave an email off like, yeah, looks good, let's publish it. Like, no, we're all giving consensus to do this. And then you do a walkthrough. Like, let's say, not a tabletop, but let's say, hey, if we had ransomware, okay, what's your job? And you start to build consensus when you do that with an organization. So that sets the tone, right? And now all of a sudden, everyone's thinking about like, oh, this is now, I understand this, right? So again, I can't stress how important this is. So the takeaway here for what we're talking about today is who owns it. If it's nobody, start building those muscles or find a provider that'll do it for you.
I love it. And I think this is the last one. Oh, there's two more. Client communication and QBR integration. And this, again, goes to a bit of that cross organization collaboration piece that we're talking about. These things cannot happen in a silo. Like, you can't let these folks just kind of run their own program and be the only people that care about it.
Right.
I think people need to care about it at all levels. It needs to be incorporated into the strategic road mapping of all the other things and projects and initiatives that are happening. And so it's a very powerful thing to share and bring in, even for a VCIO or account manager, if that's the level of individual we have in that role, to be able to bring in the security expert to speak to some of these things around policies and compliance and the governance and so on is very powerful.
Yeah. And I think, I mentioned it at the beginning of today's webinar, but in mature organizations where you have a true VCIO and VCISO program, you're going to see this work really well because the VCIO is going to be focused on the digital transformation and or digital strategy for the entire business of the client, right? So they're going to be owning kind of that client relationship. And the VCISO then is going to be a subject matter expert who is brought in to do strategy briefings. They will be running their own meetings outside of that, but they're allowed then to focus deep on risk and ferreting out the risk that's in the technical interwebs, to use a technical term. But they're gonna synthesize that, bring it with the VCISO, and present a unified front and make it really easy for the client to not have to think about like, what does this mean? It's like, here's what it means. Here's your decision points. What do you want to do? Here's what we think you should do. And then we just move on. So we see that relationship working really well with the VCIO and VCISO working together in mature organizations.
Yeah, awesome. these were some of the maybe cross-functional roles to consider in the
Mm-hmm.
conversation around who is going to maybe get mapped to a
Yeah.
particular capability in this exercise.
Yeah.
And you may not have some of these folks just yet, but some of your org chart planning may be very intentional to try and grow to that point to
Yeah.
having individuals be able to cover some of these things. So I think it's good to have that in view.
Yeah, I think that's, as you start, you're going to have one person who's a VC. So it's going to be somebody that you nominate or hire and say, okay, you're going to start building this out. You're going to get to a point where they're going to do all these things. And then I think it is time to start looking for whether you call it a junior VC or a compliance analyst or a GRC analyst, somebody who can come in with maybe a little bit more technical prowess to start, where they can run those risk assessments. They can go do that performance management. They're very comfortable working in all the tools, and they can serve all that information up to the VC. So to allow them to then distill that into business speak and go talk to and hit all the different customers that you're working with. So then you begin to create scale in the program as you build that way. And then, we're all familiar with how we do that in the other business units of our MSPs.
Yeah. And that's it for this. So we'll share that document with everybody, and I think it'll be a good conversation point internally as you start to think about this from a broader perspective. And you don't have to have kicked off a formal vCISO program to, I think, start to understand capability mapping internally at a broader level. And I think it's a powerful thing to do either way.
Yeah.
So that was the capability map worksheet, and it's time for another poll. Let's bring up poll number 2. This guy here. So this is poll number 2, and the question is, which statement best reflects your team's current vCISO mindset? Do you think, behave and act like advisors? Are you still trying to white space sell your security point solutions into every client without necessarily, a deeper conversation around risk? Is it, our way or the highway type of approach? Because there's a lot of that too, to be honest.
There is.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting that, in the context of the customer success level conversations we're having with some of our other products like Lifecycle Manager and the upcoming feature releases and stuff, I think a lot of people have started to express how MSP centric a lot of the behavior has been for 20 years around, the go-to-market. And I talk about this clip often. Chris Jensen, who is a fractional CIO in the enterprise, he works with MSPs a lot. He came on MSP Confidential not too long ago, and he was talking about how the MSP came in and did this whole pitch, and there's like, this is how we're going to do things, and this is the timeline, and these are the tools we're going to use, da 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 da. And then the client calls Chris back after the meeting. He's like, "What the hell was that? These guys, they told us this is what they were going to do, how they're going to do it, the timeline, and they didn't ask a single question about our business. They don't know the first thing about our business." And so that's this is what I mean about being MSP centric versus customer centric in that process. All right, so I think we have all folks have answered. Let's share these results here for everybody and see if there's any surprises. So Jesse, walk us through a bit of the analysis here.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit of cognitive dissonance here, because in our first poll, we had like 70+% saying we don't have a dedicated security strategy function, but now we say we have 50% as we're advisors who guide decisions. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a little misinterpretation of the poll there, or maybe I'm just understanding incorrectly.
I suppose maybe there's like a difference between actually having a strategy and just, in any particular just-in-time moment, you help guide a decision, but that may necessarily represent a broader strategy, of course.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, so I think that's probably what we're looking at here. So yeah, it's like, hey, if our client asks us at the end of the day, we're going to be advisors, but we don't have a functional process to actually repeat that. So maybe that's what we're saying here with this poll. So that's a little surprising to me, but then I think, the other 50% is, we're enforcers laying down rules and policies. I'd be interested to understand that one a bit more. Yeah. Interesting poll results.
Just a quick tangent on some of the conversations at PAX 8 Beyond this week, because a big theme was, of course, AI, the agentic revolution, and, the next phase of like what this represents for MSPs in terms of their service catalog and the products and services they offer. And of course, coming from a cloud marketplace, the focus is on, how are we going to get these folks to sell agentic stuff, right?
Mm,
Um, but what was really obvious is that the immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction from a lot of folks was, "Ooh, how am I going to package and price this and sell this?" And so my point simply being, there was still a lot of like that VAR mindset
yeah.
around
Yeah.
the agentic opportunity, and not so much kind of focus on, "Ooh, what kind of conversations can we have with our clients about this?
Right.
What kind of,
Right.
digital transformation revolution can we start through this
Mm,
process?" And so I think this is part of this mindset that affects security in many ways as well, because people tend to focus on the tools, the point solutions, and so on, and not so much on the risk or the conversation around governance and so on.
yeah.
All right, so let's get this slide going. This is the one that I'm a little bit worried about here, Jesse, because we've been talking about how critical it is, this cross collaboration.
Yeah.
But I know that this is maybe a compendium of opinion of the things that you've seen across the board with so many MSPs launching their VCSO programs. But let's
Yeah.
talk through these.
Yeah. So I guess the idea when you and I were putting this deck together was there needs to be very clear edges and rules of engagement for a VCSO program, because there are a lot of because it touches everything in the organization, right? So it's very similar to VCIO in that we are giving recommendations to the client that we then have to marshal and organize a bunch of different teams on the back end to make sure get executed properly. And also, you know, keep people from keep the friction to a minimum, right?
Hmm.
Right. So I just run through these bullet points because I know we're coming up here. We're running through this hour very quickly, which is a good thing. I'm enjoying the conversation. But so first of all, is like we have to start developing the team's organizational mindset around risk. Great example. First time I launched security and VCSO program back in 2014. Like, hey, this is what we're doing, right? And then the TAMs and people on the help desk were like, we have no idea what's going on. How
Yeah.
like, and so we had to then take a step back, and I'll own that. That was my mistake. And this is, again, a learning point of, okay, now we have to do lunch and learns and talk with the TAMs and talk with the help desk about how does this risk work? What's the idea of the service? What are we providing? How is this like opening up their mindset a little bit around risk? And then that speaks to the educate piece, right? So continuous learning going on to integrate this type of mindset and process with the organization. Once we did that, of course, technical account managers are really smart people, right? Then they're like, hey, I just talked to this client and they mentioned this. This is a good opportunity to talk VCs, or a good opportunity to insert this program, right?
Yeah.
And so then it became a compounding and positive thing rather than a frictional thing in the organization, right?
Well, and this kind of speaks to a bit of having the conversation at all levels of the customer
Mm-hmm.
journey, not just an afterthought, like, from a perspective of, okay, TAMs and VCOs, now it's time to go sell VCSO. But,
Right.
why has the client never heard of this thing that you offer before,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we just did a fireside chat with VCIO University. I think it was Tuesday. And we were talking about this, and it was a great question that Chris Ryan brought. And he's like, so, well, how do we talk about this? Because we have a client that we've been giving VCIO to. They have our cybersecurity services. And then we say, well, there's actually VCSO that you need to. Like, how do you have that conversation? And if
Yeah.
we just told the VCIO to go say, sell it, like that's the wrong approach. Okay. So it's more about like, here are here's the value for your client. Cause I find VCIOs by and large are really lion-hearted people. I guess that's the best way I could put it, is like they really care about their clients and their success, right? And so once you can show them how this enables that, they're able to make that connection and have that conversation from a place of, true integrity, rather than like go push this new service, right?
Mm. And I think that makes a really strong point for this next one, which is to always present a unified front. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard a story of like an account manager that was trying to work with the client on some kind of strategy thing, only to have a support tech completely like ridicule them on a support call, or say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or kind
Yeah,
of make
man. Oh
really
man.
undermine a bit of the strategic conversation that some
Yeah.
folks that maybe are not so technical are trying to have. And I think this is such an important piece where governance and compliance is concerned, and why it's so important to develop this mindset
Yeah.
around risk organizationally wide, right?
Well, yeah, and it's so true. And the one story that always sticks in my mind about this is when we were building our security program, had VC, so had our other program, and we launched vulnerability management. Ton of upside there if you do it right. By the way, vulnerability management can be either really good for your MSP or really bad. Because if you don't account for all the work that it's going to take, it's going to be very not a very profitable service. But in any case, launched it, and then all of a sudden the VCSOs are going to the clients and saying, hey, you have all these vulnerabilities. And the clients are like, well, isn't that covered in my patching agreement? So, but maybe it wasn't, but are the contracts clear about that? Do we have does the client have a clear understanding of what covered versus non-covered, and how is that accounted for? And at the end of the day, if we are supposed to fix it and we go dump a bunch of work on the technical team's plate, like now you got to spend 9 hours fixing vulnerabilities this week that you didn't have to do last week, you're not going to make a bunch of friends doing that, right?
Yeah.
So we have to really think about how do we structure this and get buy-in from the teams that it's going to affect as to how they are going to be able to process this workload, whether it's more people, better automation, whatever the case may be, before we ever go to the client and start talking about it.
Totally. This next one is just doubling down on this unified front idea, but it's because I stole it literally directly from an Instagram reel of some like couples therapy person saying, remember, it's you and your spouse against the problem, not you. Don't fight against each other.
Right.
And I think this is an important thing to realize. We're fighting the risk that the clients have, and we got to do that together to some extent.
Right.
And it always has to be in the context of the client goals, because otherwise they're probably not going to care about much of the things that you have to say.
Well, perfect example. Let's talk vulnerability management, just since it's top of mind. Okay. Oh, this client doesn't want to, they need vulnerability management. Well, you're probably to the tune of like $2,000 a month to do a true vulnerability management program at a minimum, not to mention if you got to fix 0 days and the project cost for that. Okay. So what does the client's need? Do they have a requirement like CMMC or something else where they have to have a vulnerability management program in place? Then yeah, that's their goal. But if it's like, they're not taking our advice, they should do it, and they're like, well, we have XDR, we have other mitigating controls, we have attack surface management, so vulnerability management right now is not in the budget, then that's kind of like, okay, actually I see where you're coming from, and you have a little bit of a higher risk. As long as you understand that, we're comfortable with where you at, we're with where you're at, right? That is having the client's goals in mind, and that's what a good vCISO program does.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Last poll of the day. What best describes your current approach to client risk assessments? And let me get this pulled up here, and we'll launch it real quick. And this will be the last conversation, or last poll before we have this conversation around the risk assessment process. I'd like to see what you guys think of this. And I think overall risk assessments, they can take, they're like shapeshifters, right?
Yeah.
They can mean so many different things. And tools like Lifecycle Insights, Lifecycle Manager in the upcoming X release functionality really help you do many levels of this. Of course, doing it at scale in the context of a framework, you're going to want to be in a product like Control Map to do it properly and be able to communicate it back to clients and be able to report on it and so on. But it is one of those things where, like, if you want to baby step your way to a risk conversation, risk assessments are a great way to do it. But be careful of the language, be careful of the conversation that you're having with clients. Don't make it like we're assessing you. No, like, hey, let's look at, let's do a discovery here of the environment and so on. All right, everybody's answered. Let's share the results here.
I think that tracks with the other numbers we're seeing, right? As we have about a 50% split of folks that it sounds like are not running like a security strategy motion. And then some who are doing it via tools. Okay, so well, at least we have no arrogant people on the call who said there's nothing you can teach me today, right?
That was the bonus answer, yeah. Okay. All right, so let's let's continue on here to talk about this risk assessment process review. And you may need to come back to the risk assessment process. You want to kind of go through the capability mapping, understand what pieces you want or can incorporate from your current organizational chart, to sort of make part of the risk assessment process. Really share these rules of engagement across with your entire team. And then you can start to do risk assessments, because what you want to do is be able to tackle the outcomes of these and
Yeah,
not just do them for the sake of doing them. That doesn't necessarily help.
right.
All right, so I'll stop sharing. Jesse, I know you were going to bring up the risk assessment template.
Yep.
We'll go through that.
Yeah, so basically we've talked about all this kind of like theoretical stuff, right? But let's like, how do we work as a team? How do we actually create rules of engagement to start actually actioning this in our organization, and what does that look like? So I'm glad there's a large amount of people on this call today, about half of our audience, it looks like, who have not done risk assessments. So I think this is going to be super helpful for you, right? So we've talked in our previous calls about like segmenting and picking some clients to go get started. Now you can take this and say, okay, now let's go deliver a risk assessment. And oh, Luis, one thing I was going to mention, I don't want to start a knife fight in the comments about risk assessment or gap assessment. What do you call it?
Yeah, well,
Right.
I think we should all be concerned with the fact that you haven't updated your Chrome browser yet, but that's for another day.
Uh, that's it was updated
Burn.
yesterday. It's got to be a new thing. So I just got to
It's
close it
it's a
out today.
daily thing for
And it
sure.
really
Yeah,
is.
yeah. We
So
need a compliance program for that.
all right. So we see here we have general swim lanes. And I always say like a template is about 80% good. It's going to give you something to get started with, but you need to then say what in your organization does this. So when you go through and you fill out that capabilities matrix, who's doing what, then you can update these swim lanes to, be appropriate to your organization and customize it to yours. But really at the end of the day, we have a security role of some sort that's doing the risk assessment. We have the IT engineer or IT team who is going to have to assist in some things in that assessment. We have a pre-sales engineer who's going to have to actually take the recommendations and scope those for the client. And then we have to have AM sales, VCIO, maybe the VCISO doing this, right? Depending on how you're structured. But again, those are the different roles that are participating in it. Okay. So first things first is in the gray boxes, you could probably take those and make a checklist, right? So if once you understand this motion well, you could say, okay, here's the checklist we got to run through for each risk assessment for each role. But I digress there. So let me zoom in a bit here. So you're going to start by, project start, admin activities, doing your kickoff call, those things, getting all that stuff, getting all the admin out of the way, setting expectations with the clients. You remember I mentioned any good VC so has a little bit of project management in their blood.
Critical skill.
Critical skill. Well, I think in almost everything, right? Unless you're like a painter or something like that. But so then you're going to probably run some sort of technical verification on top of that, right? But here's a critical piece where we first come into that cross-functional discipline. So let's say we go to the client and we say, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? What do you do for this? And they're like, you guys know this. We just talked about this with our IT team last week or with the VCIO. Check with them. They know this. That's the last place you want to be, right? So you've already positioned yourself as like on your heels. Oh, shoot. Oh, really? Okay. So first thing is we want to talk with the IT team and try and have them answer as many of the questions as possible. So that way, when we go to the client, say, we want to demonstrate knowledge of the organization, meaning that, okay, we talked to your VCIO, your AM, your IT team. Here's what they told us. Is that accurate? Is there anything different? Now the client, that's that customer success focused vision, right, Luis? So now the client's like, oh yeah, like that's great. Oh wait, actually, no, this has changed. Oh, by the way, you just got some intelligence you can give back to them and say, by the way, this has changed, update your documentation. So now we're creating this living, breathing, cross-functional discipline with the way we execute this. Past that, we're going to do client interviews. We're going to get the gap assessment. We're going to create our risk assessment report. We're going to perform our internal recommendations call review. This is another thing where it's going to touch different disciplines. So we may say, here's the things we want to recommend. Now we ask the technical account manager, here's what we're going to do. Does this line up? Are there any things that we're recommending that are going to conflict with things you know about? A great one that you always run into is like, we think you should encrypt all the hard drives of all your laptops. Well, what do we have TPM chips in all the laptops? Encryption is not an insignificant project. what if we tell the client like, oh, for compliance, you need to do this. And we like tell them that needs to be done quickly. Then the TAM says, oh, actually, I'm booked solid, guys. I can't get to this for 3 months. Then we've just told the client that they need to get it done quick, but we can't do it quick. Right. So we have to work as a team and present a unified front. So we're going to have that call, get consensus on what we're doing, and then talk with the sales engineering or solution design team to say, okay, here's what it's going to cost to do this. Have that all ready. Okay. While that's going on, we're creating our cyber roadmap. We're scheduling the client delivery meeting, and these other teams are working cross-functionally to either give feedback on like, does the IT team need to be involved in scoping certain things for the recommendations? Now you start to see how this really bleeds across a bunch of different parts of the organization, right? At the end of the day, we're going to coordinate the call with the client to present this, right? And then we're going to have that recommendations call. We're going to attend the delivery meeting. People think pitch is a dirty word. I don't care. That's what I call it, pitch, right? We're going to say, here's what we think you should do. Here's why we think you should do it based on all the things we know about you. Here's your risk. What do you want to do? So that's some level of a pitch, right? So we're going to deliver that to them, maybe not in that meeting. Depending on what's going on here, we have to make some decisions like, are there a lot of results to get through? Are we going to have a lot of discussions with the client? Do we need to split that out into a separate meeting? That all needs to be decided. And then based on that, at the end of the day, we're going to deliver that presentation, and then that's going to go run the sales funnel with our account team while the VC continues to maintain the GRC and continuous risk management with the client.
So powerful to have this clarity, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, you bet. And I can't believe I actually did get through it by 11.
All right,
let me take really over fast there.
Yeah, let me take back over the screen sharing.
Yeah.
And so we just have a couple more things to share. So the control map tool, if you're not familiar with it, definitely have a look at that. We have some cool announcements coming in the month of July, so stay tuned for that, because I think, especially as you're thinking about starting your own VCSO program, you're going to want to know about some of the stuff we're launching. We talked a little bit up front about Jesse's Power Grid VCSO system, so definitely have a look at that. I think one of the critical pieces of deploying this successfully is having that support group, having a bit of that best practices focused view on how to do each of the individual components when it starts to feel a little overwhelming. And so I think this is one of the key things about launching a program is we're kind of in this together, and we do rely on that industry level best practice. And our next session is coming up on August 7th, which is really going from a bit of this planning mode back into execution mode. And so it'll be August 7th from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. And if you're already registered for various sessions or the series, you'll get the invites for that. But otherwise, hit that link and you can sign up individually for session number 4. And that's really the content for today, folks. I mean, Jesse, wow, very insightful. Loved seeing that risk assessment workflow. Like I said at the beginning, we're going to share all those resources with everybody in the follow-up email, so you have them. And we hope to see you at the next session. Jesse.
Yeah, man. That
Virtual
was fun.
fist bump. Yeah.
We got it.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one on August 7th. Jesse, awesome to see you again, and thanks again for all your insightful and deep knowledge on this stuff, man.
You too, man. I always love getting on these with you. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care, everybody.